I think we're building our development plans around the idea that children are for youth sport. Youth sport is for children, not the other way around. That should be the starting point.
Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of 80% Mental. I'm Dr. Pete Olusoga, and this is a podcast all about the psychology of sport and performance. This series, I've been exploring the psychology underpinning various aspects of performance, and it's a journey that's taken me from the Marathon des Sables to the Birmingham Royal Ballet, from the IMG Academy in Florida, all the way to Coronation Street. I haven't actually been to any of those places, but you get the idea. I've covered quite a bit: acting, singing, dancing, strength, coaching, and this series has really been an education on how and when psychology underpins so many different types of performance. This episode is one that I've wanted to do for a long time, but I had to wait until my guest finished his PhD. Back in series 2, I did an episode on how to be a good sports parent, but today we're going to explore the psychology of the kids. We're going to explore youth sport and how, when, and why we can draw on psychology to help our understanding and to guide our practice. And I've got the perfect guest joining me today, fresh off finishing his PhD. So it's my absolute pleasure to welcome Dr. Mark O'Sullivan. Mark, welcome to 80% Mental.
Thank you very, very much. It's indeed an honor. I've been listening to the podcast in between finishing my PhD, so it's an honor. It's fascinating, and I've been following a lot of your fascinating tweets as well, which I think I really appreciate.
The less said about that, the better.
I like them. I like them a lot. I think it's good that there's that you show other sides, and even though they're political, there's something I stand firmly with you on.
No, I appreciate that. Just by way of introduction, because I sort of introduce all of my guests, Mark has just finished his PhD from Sheffield Hallam under the guidance of Professor Keith Davids and Dr. James Rumbold. Shout out James Rumbold, my old office mate. Mark is also a UEFA A licensed coach and has worked internationally as a coach and a coach educator. A key theme from Mark's research is around athlete development frameworks and how they should evolve in interaction with the socio-cultural context in which people are embedded. In other words, there's no copy and paste template, and I hope we'll get into some of that maybe during our conversation. Mark's originally from Cork City, Ireland, but has been in Sweden since 1994 and is a father of 3 who now spends his time between Stockholm and Oslo. And I have to mention as well, in a previous life, Mark was an international DJ, artist, music producer, and label owner. And we'll get into some of that a bit later as well. Sure. But Mark, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast, and I can't wait to get into some conversations with you.
Okay, let's do it.
So I guess, my first question to kind of open us up is, you've been a coach and a coach educator, like we said, for a number of years now. And I just wonder, what's your kind of mission as a coach educator, as a psych working in this field? You've been at it a long time. What would you say your sort of mission is in coaching?
That's wow.
Nice easy one to start with.
Nice easy one to start with. It's a hard one to say because, like, okay, I've worked as an artist and a musician. I've released records as well, and did I have a mission then? No, it's just to be as creative as possible and express myself as much as possible within that format. I guess within coaching, it's also, for me, it's a form of expression of myself, of being creative, etc. But I think that within when I started getting into coaching, which was totally by accident, because even though I played lots of sports, and I played 1 or 2 sports at a pretty decent level in Ireland, I was actually working in music, and I started a football club in Sweden with some friends. Just a lot of expats, Irish, English, with Dutch, Brazilians, Peruvians, Germans, Asians, everyone. So it was a really good, kind of an expat community, and we had loads of Swedes involved. So it was a really great multicultural club. And And when I was playing, there was a Dutch guy who was coaching a bunch of 15 and 16-year-olds, and I guess this was 2003 or something, 2004. And he said to me, "Can I help out with coaching?" And I thought, yeah, sure. Now, I didn't have a mission then, of course, because I hadn't even thought of it. And 3 weeks later, he kind of said, okay, he couldn't coach anymore. So I ended up going from assistant coach to being the head coach. So I said, okay, I need to figure out what this is all about. What's going on here? And I was really enjoying it. I enjoyed being around the young players and the kids, and funnily enough, being a DJ was a kind of a cool thing, which was a cool way into the group for them. So I started going on coach education courses, and I would say the mission, if I am on a mission, it's something that unfolded over time due to my experience in coaching and coach education. So I started going, okay, I need to figure out, I'll go on a course, and then I'll do another course, the FA courses here in Sweden. And I started being a bit frustrated because I had some ideas and thoughts about coaching, and I guess I hate using the word teaching with coaching, but helping young players learn how to play sport like football. I had some ideas about it. These probably came from my father when I was younger, who was also an artist, and he was a welder by trade, but was an artist and really into sport. And I can remember like going to see the Irish under 15 team play, or under 16 team play a Dutch team. I was only 10 or 11. My father explaining to me that, oh, look at the Irish lads, they're way bigger than all the Dutch guys. But look, I guarantee you, Mark, the Dutch guys have just wiped them off the pitch.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, and so he was explaining to me that this is just physical maturity you're looking at here.
Yeah.
So I was like, this is a man. I was only looking back at it now, God, this was like the late 70s, probably, or early 80s. And he was explaining this to me, and I don't think this thought entered anyone in sport in Ireland at that stage. So like, we had these huge, God, I always remember this Irish player going in to do a slide tackle on a Dutch guy at 900 miles an hour, and the Dutch guy just dropped the shoulder and moved half a yard, and the Irish guy went straight into the advertising pole barriers. So I was like, okay, so, looking at the kids in front of me and seeing they're 15, 16, some look like they're 18, others looks like they're 13. And okay, how can I work with this? And I wasn't really getting much answers in coach education at the start, because I felt it was all very predetermined, and it was very technique orientated, one size fits all. This is the right way to do things. So I started, okay, I guess maybe I should read some research. And I think what happened. Yeah, what happened was I was down in Spain visiting Espanyol, and I was asking so many questions. I must have really irritated the coach that he said, "I'll be back in half an hour. Just stay there, don't move." And he comes back honestly with a pile of papers. You should read these.
Yeah.
And within this, there was stuff like some of Keith David's work, Ian Renshaw's work, Lynn Kidman, lots of stuff like that. Game Sense, kind of early part of the constraint stuff. I was like, okay. So me and a dictionary sat down and kind of went through this. And yeah, of course, the language was a barrier to start. But the more I read and the more I got into it, I found a confidence in how I could articulate my ideas. And probably some of the seeds that were implanted in me from my father unknowingly as a very young teenager. And yeah, so I guess the mission started evolving through that my own frustrations in coach education, my own inability to articulate myself. So how can I articulate myself better? How can I maybe look at the research into human learning movement, and how can I use this to educate coaches and educate players? So that's kind of where it starts. So I think the mission is still unfolding. It's not something that I've predefined. It's still unfolding in front of me. So that's how I got into coaching. Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned kind of your ideas there, and how they were maybe at odds with some of the coach education stuff. What were some of your ideas, and how have they maybe evolved or are still evolving, I guess? over the last maybe.
Continue. Like, so when I played Gaelic football, which is one of our national sports, remember at 17 and 18, I had a great coach. And he said something to me. He said, "Oh, Mark, you're really." I used to play what's called the half forward line, which is kind of between the midfield and the full forward line. And he said to me, when you're coming, taking a ball in the air because you can catch the ball in Gaelic football, try and see if you can, as you're landing, try and check around, see what's happening. That's all he said. Just check around, see what's happening. So we were doing these practice games, and a lot of the sessions he was doing would be very much small-sided games, even in Gaelic football, or bigger games. And he was years ahead of his time. Of course, I didn't know this at the time.
Hmm.
So I was practicing. So I started practicing, okay, what's he on about? What do I do? What do you mean? I just take the ball down and turn, No, but then I was realizing, okay, there's a guy on my right. I'm gonna fake the right as I land and go left. Things like this were starting to evolve. So implicitly learning to take in information at vital moments in a game. And I was like, okay, this is interesting. And what is this? And what is that? So when I went to coach education, I found it very reductionist and very, okay, this is how you teach somebody to pass a ball. This is how you teach somebody to dribble. And, they were very, very, even in the Swedish word was lära ut, to learn out. This is how you learn out to a child. So as opposed to my Gaelic football coach he was facilitating some ideas. He was telling me what I could be doing, not how, what I could be doing. And wants me, instead of lära ut, he wanted me to learn in, if that makes any sense,
Yeah, sure.
So the Swedish coach education and the Irish and the English at that time was very based on a very reductionist way, cause effect. If you do this will be the right way to do it. You have to have your angle, your foot planted like this. You have to have this, and that's what it was. And then even the exercises you had for passing were all predetermined. And it was very, I found it very overstructured. And I was trying to figure, is this really the game? And, and so that's where it was that part of coach education that I found very tough at first. And then when I went to the research, I was able to question it at a pretty okay level. So it's somewhere in there that this, I'm very fortunate that this kind of absolute curiosity just started exploding, which ended up by some massive series of coincidence, me doing a PhD in it. So it was kind of in there, and it's, as I said, it's still unfolding. It's my whatever mission, how I want to work, is still unfolding. It's still happening, and that's what's really cool about it, actually.
So this is kind of, rather than the cookie cutter copy and paste,
Yeah.
this is how you do this drill, this is how you do this.
Yeah.
It's very much kind of defining almost a sandbox and saying, go play, go explore, sort of learning by trial and error, intuition.
Yeah, I mean, like the way that coach explained to me, he said what I should do. As you go up and get the ball, as you're coming landing, how can you take in information to, to maybe have the best outcome for that moment? Just a simple thing like that. Go and explore, and allowing me to explore it, and allowing me to test it and see what happens. And just that alone was a big moment for me. And the other major moment for me, actually, was when I was doing my UEFA B in Sweden. Now, to the defense of the Swedish FA, they've changed all this in 2015. They've really made big efforts to change the coach education, which they should be really credited for. So I'm doing my UEFA B, and I think this is about 2009 or 10, and we have a goalkeeping module, and I think it's one of the head goalkeeping coaches for the Swedish FA. I think he worked with the national team, came out to us, and he said, okay, we're going to work today with goalkeepers distribution, kicking from the hand, Okay. And he points at me for some reason out of like 30 people. He says, have you played in goal? And I went, never. I was like, okay. He says, okay, good. You're in goal. You're the guinea pig. So I'm fine. And I'm there in the hole, ball in hand. And he goes, all right, can you kick from your hand? Yeah, sure. Bam. Do it again. Let's do it again. Bam. Then I start doing half volleys. drop kicks. Then I switch to the left foot and start doing all that. And he's looking at me going, "Have you ever played in goal?" "No, never." And it goes on. He goes, "Ah, come on, you must have." And I said, "No, no, but I've played Gaelic football." And he was like,
Mm.
"What? What's that?" So he looked up what it was. He goes, "Okay, wow." It's like, but who taught you how to do this? And I went, and I actually did not understand the question. Who taught you this? I said, "What are you on about? What do you mean, who taught me this?" Nobody. It's like, I've been playing this since I'm 8 years of age. And, if you can't do this, you're probably going to get killed
Yeah.
in the game. It's like, it's a pretty physical game. And to be honest with you, I'm probably far better at kicking a ball from hands when somebody's trying to take it off me, And he was like, he was completely shocked, fascinated by this. And I said, nobody, and there's probably 250,000 11-year-olds in Ireland that can do this way better than me,
Mm.
and that was another moment that I went, boom, okay, there's something here. There's something more. And only reflecting on it as I started my studies, I started thinking about, hang on, there's also sociocultural context in learning certain skills.
Yeah.
The context of Gaelic football and the games we have played and the coaches that have afforded me certain opportunities to evolve these skills. So without actually being told how to do it, because he said the technique I had was remarkable. He said,
Yeah.
and I said, yeah, but it's mine. It's not perfect. No, it's not the perfect one we'd look for. And that's why I said, well, there isn't one.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, we've talked about this idea of this one size fits all approach and how kind of perhaps reductive that is. But in your PhD, you talk not only about the context that you're operating in. You just mentioned the sociocultural forces, but also the historical
Yeah.
sociocultural forces that perhaps impact upon the current coaching context. And for any kind of coaches that are out there listening, or even any psychs who are working with coaches, can you talk to me a little bit about how and why that's such an important piece of the puzzle to consider, this historical sociocultural context? I don't know if you have any maybe like
Yeah.
examples.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that, basically, if we could just teach people learn out skills to people, you've worked in basketball. Ah, they're the best, the NBA. Now let's just take what they do there and we'll just dump it into Wrexham in the
Yeah.
UK. And definitely going to have the greatest in the world then. It's not going to work that way. It doesn't work that way because there's a specific sociocultural context in basketball from the USA, that is very specific to how they learn to play,
Yeah.
It could be everything from a club to pick up games to whatever, having to be growing up in an area where there's just loads of basketball courts and people, challenging each other and playing each other. So in Ireland, we have Gaelic football and hurling, and we have rugby and we have other sports. So I did a debate recently on Irish radio, and a debate article I wrote about, whereas that we really need to get back to this in Ireland, that, we've such a unique sociocultural context for learning skills that even if you play these other sports as a child, they can probably offer unique movement skills for children in football. So the issue is that if we could just copy and paste from another culture a skill, like, we'd all be probably going, okay, who's the hype country now, whatever it is, Belgium, yeah, let's just do what the Belgians do,
Hmm.
you know but that's a completely different cultural context. They have the Walloon and the Flemish, people, and now they're the second generation immigrants playing from that don't care about Walloon or Flemish divide. So there's a whole different context. There's Brazil, the 50s, the 1958 team, the 62, 60, 70 team, and the 82 team. Very much what they call now functional football, a
Mm-hmm.
very specific way of playing that aligns with their with their social, cultural, historical context. And they actually have a name for it. They call it Jinga, to play with Jinga, to play with sway.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, of course, goes back to probably the capoeira and the samba.
Yeah.
And of course, the history of the history of the slaves being brought from Angola there. And it's all in there. And as they integrate, you have the mulatto population there that come out from that, and they're looked down upon, and you have this thing. I forget the word. It's trickster, which is another character. They call him the trickster. But this is what they were doing on the pitch. They were playing out all these parts. The trickster, the playing with Jinga, and also the how they played was completely different and how they moved. So if you look at like Brazil team from '82, how they play and move is nowhere near how an English team would walk on the pitch or run on the pitch.
Yeah.
So that's an example. And the other simple example I give would be Pavel Datsyuk. I did a paper on him. Pavel, the Magic Man Datsyuk, an ice hockey player, uh, ice hockey Hall of Famer, won numerous Stanley Cups with Detroit Red Wings, grew up in the old Soviet Union. So I did a long interview to him about myself and my co-writer Vlad. We did an interview with Pavel about his childhood, then also dug deep into the socio-cultural context of his childhood, including the historical sporting context. And an interesting thing he said was that as a child, that if you broke a stick, if he broke a stick, he could be waiting at least 1 month to get a new one. So he decided that, well, I want to play hockey every day. So he learned. He said, I learned to play protecting the stick and the puck. So he started evolving this very unorthodox way. Now, probably in a traditional coaching, and he said, I never did slap shots. And to this day, I still can't do a slap shot, he said.
Yeah.
So he said, like, if you probably in traditional coaching, you have to learn a slap shot, but for him, he just didn't do it because it would put his stick at risk. So arguably, you could say because of under socioeconomic factors, constraints, that he evolved a way of playing that to respond to this, so he could keep continuously playing, and keep his stick safe. So he has this very unusual style. So when he turns up at the NHL, it's like people saying, what are these skills? What's he doing? So they call him the Magic Man. So there's another example of how the social cultural context influence skills. But the thing is that is and this is the moment in my UEFA B, as I said, that it just all went off, I guess, that how come I can do this and, all the other people who are goalkeeping coaches and they have to teach it, they have to learn it out. They think they have to learn it out to the
Yeah.
coaches. So it really just got me going, got me thinking. Of course, there's loads of examples of this. You probably have New Zealand rugby. I mean, we can't copy paste that.
Yeah.
South Africa won the World Cup this year. I don't think we can copy paste that into Scotland or something. Just exactly what they do.
And yet you still see examples of this, even in kind of elite sport, top level sport, where people still try and do this. They still try and kind of, okay, well, what's the latest thing that seems to be working in such and such a context? Oh, well, let's do that. So you still see, and I wonder why that is. Is that just kind of because it's easy to try that, or because when you talk about that, the context, the examples that you've given, like beyond anything else, it's just fascinating.
Yeah.
Once you start to peel back the layers, it's just it's genuinely interesting, and I don't understand why you wouldn't want to dive into that.
I have a kind of an idea that I'm thinking about this. Why there's so much copy paste. And I think this is down to the emergence of the dominance of administration.
Go on.
It's easier to box tick copy paste templates than to actually go, you know what, we need to find out, we need to dig where we're standing. We need to figure out why we do what we do. Why do we think this way? Why do we act this way? Why do we play this way? That's far too complex. You can't measure that either. But hey, we've a fantastic template here that we're just going to take in from a successful country. Country X did it, they got Y. So let's do what country X did. And of course, we'll get Y as well. But I think it's probably, my feeling is due to the dominance of administration. It's not just that, but that has helped shape it. So particularly, I think that when I work in the Norwegian School of Sports Science, I'm an associate professor there, and I speak with some of my kids, and they're asking about careers in coaching. And now Norway's not as bad, but I said, in some countries, you're better off getting a career in administration in sport than coaching, because you're probably going to get paid better, and there's probably a more future there, because it's ending up now with all these certification models that you have to, administration has now been attached to the money that's being distributed. And this is why I think we've loads of copy and paste things, because it's much easier to administrate. That's what I'm thinking at the moment about it. What's your thoughts? Anything in that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I would totally agree. I think it's, it kind of brings me on to the next part of what we're going to talk about, which is the sort of purpose of youth sport. But yeah, I think it's easier to do the easy thing, isn't it?
Yeah,
Um, and I don't know whether it's naivety, this idea of just, well, let's take the dominant thing that works and let's try and apply that without a real understanding of those socio-cultural factors and the
yeah.
context. And I don't know if it's
So
just a naivety or a lack of understanding.
so I have a paper just come out in the Journal of Sports Science there last week, and I show examples of how the Australian football, who had this golden, you could call them golden generation,
Hmm.
but that evolved through Croatian and Serbian immigrants playing in their local communities. And
Yeah,
they stayed in their local communities playing with one club, while Australian kids were jumping from club to club to be more successful in youth. But this group were very much central to a quite a successful Australian football team in the early 2000s. And a couple of them played in the Premier League and etc. And kind of put Australia back on the world map of soccer or football. But then the Football Association took in a Dutch model,
yeah,
and I found some newspaper articles where they're saying that this was a complete disaster because it does not resonate with who we are or our culture. So this
yeah,
is really cool that they've seen this. And then there was Lithuania. I was over in Lithuania, and they were adopting a Belgian model. They went as far as actually using Anderlecht's player development plan to run the whole country's player development plan.
hmm,
And I think that's dead now and gone.
yeah,
But like, come on, Lithuania and Belgium, it's so the issue now is that I've seen it going so far, and this is where it touches the administration, that this copy and paste has gone so far that we're heading towards what I would call a homogenization and globalization of coach education. We're
hmm,
back to a one size fits all coach education. True. So when somebody like UEFA says we want to standardize coach education, I get very nervous.
yeah,
So
yeah. Sure.
I'm seeing now what's evolving is what I call a methodological imperialism. And this was very evident in the last World Cup. And there's a great guy called Juan Lilo, who is the assistant coach to Pep at Man City, but he's also been Pep Guardiola's mentor many years ago. And he did this analysis of the World Cup, and he said that this is a disaster. All the teams, except for Argentina, actually, are playing the exact same way. And he
Yeah,
said at halftime, Brazil and Cameroon could change shirts, and the only reason why I'd know like who is by which players or who is by their hair color or tattoos, because they just basically were playing the exact same type of football. And what he said is interesting is this called positional play. He said he said if there's one thing I could change, it would be me 25 years ago, because I brought a lot of these ideas to the table and I've seen what's happening now, and this is not good. It's all about coaching. The coach is the center of everything. But Argentina did the opposite. They had this thing they spoke about. Messi says in an interview, we need to go after the first game, we need to go back to La Nuestra, our way. And
yeah.
that's basically what they did. Argentina were really just an outlier in this World Cup.
Hmm. I think a really interesting point there as well is something to consider is this idea that even within, you talk about the historical context, and even within a particular culture, that socio-cultural context changes. So, I
Yeah.
always think about the example of the England football team, who we can't go to a World Cup without somebody mentioning the war.
No. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And we so I know that they did a lot of work on identity before I think it was 2018, in the build up to 2018 World Cup, because there's still that imagery around, the Blitz spirit and Terry Butcher with blood pouring out of his head,
Yeah.
and there's still this sort of imagery and culture around English football, but it doesn't actually mean anything to a group of
No.
players who were born in the late 1990s.
No. And I even remember the debate, should Glenn, I mean, I was a Man United fan as a kid, but my favourite player was Glenn Hoddle. He was an artist on the pitch,
Hmm.
but he was a luxury player.
Yeah,
He didn't put in a shift, apparently, you know. But this
yeah,
guy was, as a great thing is like England are coming off the pitch after losing 2-0 to Holland, and Ruud Gullit says, "Well, what do you expect when you've Glenn Hoddle on the bench? If he was Dutch, he would be God." but of course he didn't. You know, he
Yeah,
didn't show the aggressiveness or the temperament of the Blitz. If
yeah,
you know what
yeah,
you're
yeah, yeah,
saying
yeah.
there, he didn't show the, you know.
Yeah, and that's it, you know. So it's, I think it's all very well and good having, you know, defining your way of playing and your style of coaching and style of playing based around that sort of cultural context, but also there needs to be an understanding that that in itself shifts and changes and
Yes.
evolves as well.
And this England team's a perfect example of it.
Yeah.
Even I like them. We're praising them on Irish radio. There's something has changed. You know, they're great. They represent their country really well. And Gareth Southgate represents the best in what I think English people, what being English is,
Hmm.
in my opinion, as an Irishman, like, because I have English friends, and you know, he represents them really well, I think.
Praise for an England football team from an Irishman.
I know.
The world's gone mad. This is the 80% Mental Podcast, and I'm here with Dr. Mark O'Sullivan. And honestly, it's been an absolutely incredible conversation so far, putting to rights coach education, talking about the importance of the historical, socio-cultural context in, you know, creating coaching culture, creating perhaps ways of working and methods. I want to switch up a little bit, and I want to give you another really easy question. In your opinion, what do you feel the purpose of youth sport should be? You know, we kind of want to come back to sort of youth sport in particular. Like, what should the purpose of it be?
Youth sport is for children, not the other way around. That's basically it. Children are not for youth sport. Youth sport is for children. And I think we're building our development plans, our player development, if you want to call them, whatever pathways, around the idea that children are for youth sport. Youth sport is for children. And that should be the starting point. And it's a very, very big nuance and discussion I think a lot of people have difficulty in. I mean, you know, my 8-year-old here is speaking about Santa Claus, you know, coming giving him presents. In most countries, he's part of a talent ID system to go into an academy. You know, so when somebody usually says to me, "Hey, you know, I'm just starting to coach 7, 8-year-olds. What advice would you give me?" I said, "Never, ever, ever forget that some of them probably believe in Santa Claus." So I still think that's really absurd that we have actually academies and elite teams for 8-year-olds that probably believe in Santa Claus.
Well, I
So
remember speaking to you years ago about this, and
yeah,
you know, I think the example you gave at the time was Manchester City. I think they had an elite under
under
fives.
five academy, yeah, that was
Yeah,
something. Yeah.
elite under fives academy. I mean, what do we make of that? You know, because the concept of elite youth sport still gets thrown around all the time. Like,
Yeah, of course it does. But then all you have to do then is, but look how successful Man City are.
I mean, Man
That's
City is only one example, you know, but
I know,
there's lots
but
of
the whole point is people extrapolate it out to look how successful they
yeah,
are. Yeah,
yeah,
but that's nothing to do with these 5-year-olds, you know. And anyway, like we still base our systems. So I'm even over here. There's a debate. It's called the crisis in Swedish football, and my reply is actually no. The debate is the crisis, not the football, because the debate is at such a bad level. I think so. We're only looking at survivors of systems. So a lot of these youth sports now is built around survivorship.
yeah.
Who survived the system? Oh, look, it's easier for a journalist to say, oh, he came into the academy at 6 and now he's playing in our first team. And that's the clickbait story.
Yeah.
The other ones that just have completely meandering, complex developments with just a lot of luck and serendipity thrown into the middle of it and coincidences, that's not interesting, you know?
Yeah, I
But
mean, I've got some figures here. I think out of all the boys who enter an academy at the age of 9, the number of people who quote unquote make it, less than half of 1%.
yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
children
So,
at football academies are more likely to get hit by a meteorite than to
yeah.
succeed as a professional athlete.
And we go back to then we're only and the systems are still we're still building systems on that Tiny, tiny, tiny.
Yeah.
Talent is a graveyard of evidence. Nobody sees the dead bodies.
Mm.
So when we go back to, again, it's sport is for children, not the other way around.
So
Children are not to be used for sport, and they're part of an economic system now, almost at this stage.
no, that's exactly it. And I
Yeah,
read a paper, and I talk about this paper all the time, and I should really find out the name of the guy who wrote it because I forget it every time. But it's a sociologist, and he talks about the idea of the athlete as a widget,
yeah,
just a
okay,
part in a
yeah,
machine that's entirely replaceable and is replaced over and over and over and over again. And coaches fall into this category as well,
yeah,
kind
yeah.
of. But it's a really interesting paper, and it kind of highlights some of those issues that we see in youth sport. The athlete is just a widget; they serve a function in this capitalist machine,
Yeah.
essentially, and it's not about sport being for kids. It's about kids being part of this almost production line. I'm going to
Mhm.
try and find that paper and put it in the show notes because
But don't you think also that this production line then gets fed by a load of myths like we've all had turning up at our academic doors like 10,000 hours?
of course, yeah,
You
of
know,
course,
these pop science myths. And yeah, that fits in nicely there. Let's just shove that in there. And then there's this windows of opportunity, this golden age for learning between 7 and 12. Oh,
mm.
that suits the narrative. Let's dump that in there as well.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, another kind of really easy question for you then. How do we get from where we are now with this to where you feel that we should be for sport being for the kids? Like, how do we flip this around? I know some of the
Well,
work that you're doing in Sweden is kind of important in this.
yeah, yeah. Well, sports should be for kids, but I do think also we need to be, that if a child turns up to play football or basketball in a club, they're there to play football and basketball.
Hmm.
If they don't want to be there, we shouldn't be forcing them to be there. There are tendencies where parents push kids in and the kid doesn't want to be there. And that's another thing. I think an important thing also is this idea of this polarization of specialization or sampling different sports. We shouldn't be forcing children to sample sports. We should make opportunities available for them
Mhm.
and make them economically viable as well. That's an important thing. But we shouldn't be forcing them to sample, and we should not be forcing them to specialize. And I think what really needs to happen is probably at a government level. There needs to be a demand, if there is government funding, that sports associations of different sports will say basketball, whatever. So maybe in Sheffield we'll say there's football, basketball, uh, and rugby. We'll just give those three sports. Imagine they're the sports.
Hmm.
That as part of their funding, as part of agreement, they have to work together to allow affordable opportunities for children to take part in different sports, but also support in a way that, well, if you're not serious about football now at 9, then and you're going off playing rugby once or twice a week or
Hmm.
basketball, then you can't be with us. That needs to stop. I think a key to it is that we need to start. There needs to be demands if it's connected to funding. Is that you're working with children? These sporting associations should be there for children and should actually be communicating and collaborating. Because I think from this anyway, because some kids will say, no, I don't want to play rugby. I don't want to play basketball. I just want to play football. Great. Some kids might just want to play basketball. Great.
Yeah, yeah.
But make it open to them, give them the opportunity. And that's one of the things we did at AIK in the 8 to 12. If kids had other sports, that's fine. We don't, the expectation is we always have an expectation. You're at every training session. That's not a rule. That's just an expectation.
Hmm.
Oh, you play other sports. That's no problem. Fine. How can we work this out? How can we work this out for you? And so it works. So you don't get stressed and So we tried to do this, and it is tough within a society that assumes that you have to practice every day with a coach to be the best. But over time, it worked. I think over the 6 years I was there, we increased the amount of children in the age group by 400. And we didn't do anything special. We actually took away the early selection model, which they used to select at 8 and now was at 13. And we had more children coming. Everyone thought we'd less and we'd lose children. In fact, the opposite happened.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of children that are playing other sports, and some children now that are playing in the academy. I just looked at there Friend of mine's the head academy coach for the new group that have come in. Some of them have been playing a couple of different sports. Some of them haven't. But they were allowed to choose, and they were never told you can't play with us if you're doing
Yeah.
this other sport. So I think there has to be some sort of. I'm wondering, should this be tied to government? If government is funding this,
Yeah.
then
Well, I
there should be
mean,
a demand set on. Okay, we need to work together on this. How do we do this?
yeah. Well, I mean, as you were talking there, I was thinking back to my own childhood. And, when I was a kid, when I was sort of 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, I lived pretty near to a leisure centre. Lived like literally just across the road. But it was really cheap. So it was government subsidized, right? So I could
Hmm?
go and pay just a few pence or whatever. And I played tennis, I played basketball, I
Yeah.
played football, I did judo, I did swimming, I played badminton, and every summer there were multi-sport camps. So I had access and opportunity to all of these different things, and this is
Hmm?
like me as a poor kid growing up in Gateshead, right? And that leisure centre that I used to go to is closed now
Hmm?
because there's
But
no funding. But having that sort of opportunity to do lots and lots of different things, and eventually I settled on playing basketball because I loved it, right? But I still had the opportunity to do that. And I think, one thing that does, and that there's lots wrong with the American system, but one thing that they do really well is that they produce athletes.
hmm.
So you can take somebody who plays basketball and they can go and play American football or baseball or whatever,
Hmm.
whereas over here, you mentioned this idea of early specialization, and you've got kids who play football and nothing else from the age of 5. And then when they get spat out at
Yeah.
8 or 9 or 10 or however old it is they get to when they're told that they're not good enough, well, they don't know how to do anything else.
Yeah, and their whole world falls apart.
Yeah.
Probably they don't know. And again, I know there's even issues being brought up about burnout as well. And as you've
Yeah.
touched on
Yeah.
coach burnout, I know when you're podcasting, but we have player burnout, young kids burning out, and again, like these, what we're looking at, like you might have, these are all symptoms of a bigger problem, and a
Yeah.
bigger problem is probably how adults run sport. How adults run sport. It's often seen that children are for sport, not that sport is for children.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
and I know we kind of discussed this before privately, but and again I'm wondering, why are we just looking at symptoms and not
Yeah.
dealing with the problem?
I was thinking about this, and I have it's a similar situation in higher education. So obviously I work in
Mm,
higher education, and the way that I describe it is there are two opposing and competing forces at play here, right? So from the university perspective, it's money, getting people through the door, making as much money as possible, right? Because capitalism.
mm,
And then at my end, you've got a whole bunch of lecturers who are doing that job because they are educators, because they want to help kids learn how to think about the world and learn the subject and be passionate about the subject and be critical about the subject. Those two forces are at complete odds with each other. And,
mm,
there's only ever going to be one winner. And I see the same thing in sport and coaching. It's this idea of the athlete as a widget in this capitalist system.
mm,
There are these forces that are about production, right? How can we get kids through, um, find the next Messi and sell them on for, and then you've got these coaches who are passionate about coaching and want to see kids develop and have fun and enjoy themselves. So,
mm,
I see it almost as this fundamental clash in ideologies,
mm.
and I don't see how that can be resolved without a complete change in the system.
I
So
think,
that's why
yeah,
we
there
end up
needs to be
treating
a
the
complete.
symptoms rather than the
Yeah, exactly. Stopping sense, and of course, then I think the underpinning ideology there is probably based on causality, very deterministic systems. That, hey,
mm,
if we do this now at this age and this at this age and this at this age, we'll get this elite athlete.
yeah,
And it's so deterministic. The whole system's like, as I've said on numerous podcasts before, like we still have ages and stages models. That's just ridiculous.
mm,
Oh, at 10 you should be able to do this with your left foot and then your right foot or whatever. There's elite athletes playing in World Cups can't do half that stuff. You know, it's like, so come on, and it's like, and again we have the systems are chronological. when we're biological complex adaptive systems. So there's so many of these issues, but I do think we need to start. Okay, maybe it is trying to get the major stakeholders, the major federations, the major organizations involved in youth sport, the governing bodies. How do we work together, and how do we do this, and how do we make it affordable? Because it has to be, like, for you, that was affordable what you were doing as a child. It was affordable. It also meant that people from different socioeconomic backgrounds, cultures, whatever, could come there.
Exactly. Yeah.
So you might be meeting some kid from a very wealthy background, some an Asian kid, an English working class kid, different. But it was there for them.
Yeah.
It wasn't there just for. It wasn't an integration project.
Yeah.
It was it was an inclusion project that was there for everyone.
So this is the 80% Mental podcast. I'm here with Dr. Mark O'Sullivan, and we are still going on about coaching and youth sport and trying to set the world to rights. Mark, on these podcasts, I don't know if you've listened to any recent episodes, but I always want to feel like I get to know the guests a little bit more. And obviously I know you already, but I've got a little game that I like to play, and I have 4 sets of questions here. In 4 different envelopes. Deep and
I
meaningful.
knew there was something. I know about this, and now I'm just going to say shit. No.
Well, I mean, first of all, are you up for playing?
Yeah, I am up for playing. Of course
fantastic.
I am. I was like, I completely forgot about this. Go on.
All right, so I've got 4 different sets of questions. Deep and meaningful. Have you ever, either or the last time? So I'm going to ask you to choose an envelope, because I've got 4 different envelopes here. 1, 2, 3, or 4.
3.
3.
3 is the lucky number.
So we've got.
Wasn't that De La Soul?
Magic number. 3 is a magic number.
3 is a magic number. Yeah.
Okay, so we've got the last time.
Oh God.
Questions about the last time. I'll start you off nice and easy. All right. When was the last time you crossed a border?
On Friday.
I was going to say that's a pretty easy question for you, because you flip flop between
Norway and Sweden. Norway pretty regularly.
Entirely non-interesting one to start with. Then, when was the last time you threw a party?
I threw one. Oh God, it's been a while, but it would have probably been a small birthday party that I DJ'd at with some friends at my apartment, where I set up the decks and we played records and had a few drinks.
You still get that out every night. Still get the decks out every now and then.
Yeah, every now and then I might even wander into some bar and restaurant that asks me to play. If sometimes I do that, yeah.
All right, so still an active DJ.
Yeah. I still collect my vinyl. I have my deck set up there in the background.
Yeah. What's your record collection standing at now?
I have no idea. I mean, the thing is that when my last proper gig, you could say, was headlining the dance tent at the Roskilde Festival. And I was on stage wondering, did I book the washing room for the And I kind of figured that maybe that was 2006. And I don't know, as I started getting into coaching, I kind of just got rid of a lot of records, including all the ones I've released. So I've actually spent the last 2 years buying back records that I released that are as an artist through Discogs.
Yeah.
So I used to have a few thousand, but I don't think I have now.
What's I asked this question on the last podcast I did. Just it's kind of break from the format. But since we're on the topic, what's an album that you can listen to with no skips? Like perfect album.
Probably Marvin Gaye, What's Going On.
Yeah.
I also like DJ Shadow, Introducing. It's an incredible album. Miles Davis, In a Silent Way. I have a great reggae compilation called Randy's. It was a small record label and store in Jamaica. And it's a compilation of stuff they released, and that's just mind-blowing. It's just stunning. The first Massive Attack album, I think, is pretty special as well.
Good shout. Good shout.
Mm.
Okay, back to the last time. When was the last time you borrowed a book?
Probably from my colleague Christian at NIH a few months back. I never read it yet. So it was that. I would think that would be the last time I borrowed a book.
I mean, I'll ask you what the book was, but if you haven't read it, then
Yeah.
When was the last time you told someone something you weren't supposed to tell them?
Actually, remember going back to my 8-year-old believes in Santa Claus. I didn't know he still believed in Santa Claus.
Oh dear.
And I kind of passed the wrong comment at the wrong time, but managed to dig myself out of it. So that would probably be the last time. And I think that was only last week.
Okay. When was the last time you felt really happy?
I mean, I felt happy this morning waking up my kids and just like trying to wake them up. And, I felt happy then, really happy. I think that's, yeah, I feel happy when I'm with my kids, I think a lot of times. So, but I'll tell you one, just something that I really, and it was unusual. It was a mixture of sadness and happiness. I saw some of Shane McGowan's funeral broadcast from Ireland,
Hmm.
and the Pogues got up on stage with Lisa O'Neill and Glenn Hansard, two Irish artists, and they did Fairy Tale in New York in the church. And then people got up and started dancing.
Oh wow!
And I felt so happy.
Yeah.
But I mean, it was like a very sad occasion, but very joyous. And I felt it was another type of happiness that, God, this is great. That I hope people see this. This is, this is really Ireland,
Yeah.
and you had Johnny Depp carrying the coffin, and you had Jerry Adams as one of the speakers, the president of Ireland. You had Nick Cave playing it, and I just like looked. I felt kind of happy. I know it's a funeral, but the joy of that moment of people up and dancing.
Yeah. No, I get that.
I kind of felt. I felt really happy, like almost tearful happy.
Yeah.
That's another happiness, of course.
So, speaking of that, then speaking of Ireland, when was the last time you visited your hometown?
That was just before the pandemic, but I'm going to go back, I think, in March.
Oh, okay.
For a while, yeah, March, April, yeah. I need to, yeah. I've been living in not Cork for far too long.
All right. Well, Mark, thank you very much for playing the game that I still haven't thought of a name for yet. I appreciate finding out a little bit more about you.
You're more than welcome. That was fun. I survived. Do I get a t-shirt?
So this is the 80% Mental Podcast. I'm here with Dr. Mark O'Sullivan, talking about the psychology of the kids, all things youth sport, youth coaching. If you've enjoyed what you've been listening to so far, don't forget you can subscribe at 80percentmental.com, or you can follow us on Twitter at EPM Podcast or on Instagram at 80percentmental. Leave us a comment, send us a tweet. I would love to know what you think about what you've heard so far. Mark, I've just got a couple of questions left if you've got time.
Yeah.
We've kind of talked about lots of the things that are being done maybe poorly. Some of the areas where we could maybe make some improvements in youth sport and youth coaching. I want to ask you, what are the things that are happening in youth sport that are amazing? What's some of the really good stuff that's happening, and what is it that's facilitating that?
From my understanding now, and of course I'm not there, I don't have too much first-hand experience, is that I can see what's really happening in Irish rugby at young level, about how they're really encouraging kids and they keep them within the system, because the understanding that it's very much a physical sport and is based on physicality quite heavily at the top level. So what I'm understanding from people that I spoke with working there, I really thought what they're doing there at the youth level. I had a friend, an Irish friend who lives here, who went to the Leinster rugby camp brought his son there when he was 14. And he said all the players came down and the top players to meet the kids and just hang out and chat with them, you know.
Yeah.
So I think there seems to be a lot of good stuff happening there. I think they've kept it very, just keep people in the system, keep kids in the system. Um, I really admire my friend Debbie, who runs this club, Debbie Sayers runs Salisbury Rovers. She was so like couldn't understand the youth's football systems in England and how they work. So she started her own club, and it's basically run by the children, and they are very involved in all the decisions. They actually are involved in decisions.
Hmm.
Yeah, so it's phenomenal, and the club is growing and growing and growing and growing, and it's almost like she facilitates the club while the children are the ones that determines more or less determines its direction. And I think she's somebody you should get on. She's a human rights lawyer as well.
Okay.
So it's fantastic the work they're doing. And they do a lot of community stuff as well, you know, a lot
Yeah.
of street football community stuff in certain areas. Just go and play somewhere in a yard and with loads of kids and from the area. It's really good work. It's well worth checking out
Yeah.
at
So
Salisbury Rovers.
yeah, I'll put a
Um,
link if they've got a website or anything. But
Yeah,
I
they
mean, it
do.
sounds
I'll
like
send it on to you. And it's really, really good. And she's really pushing the United Nations Convention of Children's Rights in
yeah.
sport. Fascinating what they're doing. I think it's wonderful.
So it really is kind of
Um,
sport for the kids, you know, like you were saying earlier. Yeah.
exactly. I just think there's a lot of my experience now, early experience in Norway. It's pretty impressive that they're. I mean, this is a country of 5 million people, and they've developed a couple of good, a couple of good footballers they have, and but like if you look at their winter sports, and you know, one of my students last year is involved in I think it's the Olympic beach volleyball coaching and things, and the actual opportunities and the interest they have for children, because I know they don't have academies until 13 in football in general. Of course, there are issues, but what I'm really impressed by is that I have never been in a country where I've met coaches, administrators, um, technical directors, and academy directors with so many of them with academic backgrounds. It's really like I go and I meet somebody at a club and they have a master's,
Hmm.
or a coach. I've got my bachelor and my UFA. And that's really interesting. I think it's fascinating, and this is across a lot of sports. I'm finding that's my initial thing. So I think what they're doing is interesting there. Um, mm,
You can
I
talk
know
about your
some.
own work as well, because I know that you're doing some really good work as well here.
Yeah, we've been doing some work at AIK in Stockholm. Of course, I don't work there now because of the new job, but
Mm.
that's continuing that 8 to 12 space because Stockholm is very, there are a few big academy clubs there, and it's very um, the race to the bottom is pretty frantic there. And we have the Instagram one-on-one coaches that are there everywhere as well. The
Yeah,
Instagram
yeah, yeah.
one-on-one, you pay your €100, and I can get your kid to dribble in and out cones and teach them how to kick a ball properly and all this stuff. And
I was going
so
to
that's
ask you about
pretty
that actually.
rampant.
I
And
was going
then
to ask you about that because you see a lot of that in basketball as well.
yeah,
Everybody's got a one-to-one skills trainer, and there's always posting videos of themselves online on Instagram and what have you. And
yeah,
it's huge. It's a
yeah,
huge thing right now.
yeah, and like that's huge here in Stockholm as well. And we have now parents with Instagram accounts for their gifted 10-year-old. And it's kind of like, so we've been really turning the volume down on that. Now the idea here is that in many ways we can't stop this behavior, but maybe we should try and turn the volume down a bit, because these parents are investing, that a parents invest time in their children is something we should welcome, but there's certain aspects of it we need to turn the volume down on.
Yeah.
We can't stop them doing stuff. So our work there, and our kids like the 8, 9, and 10 year olds used to train twice a week, and we would offer them an extra training that they could decide if they wanted to turn up or not. And we used to have over 70 kids from each age group at each extra training. So there'd be 120 or 110 kids in an age group, each age group. We've got 70 turn up for extra training. But then that meant they would mix with other groups. So we'd have about, say, each age group would have 6 or 7 groups that are teams that are pretty random.
Mhm.
And then they'd meet and we'd mix them as much as possible. And we would just do some, I guess, coaching, a lot of games, a lot of 1v1s, 2v2s. Tried to get them, say to some 8-year-olds, okay, guys, do you know what you can do next week? Find out something you see on YouTube, some cool thing a player is doing, show it to me. All right, let's do this. And they might say, all right, we're going to play a 3v3 here. Let's see if you can integrate that in there. Just a bit of fun, have a fun for the kids. And very much we tried to design sessions where the kids would drive it, meaning that if it was a particular design, that the kids would drive how the session started, who starts at the ball and when, as opposed to me going, okay, now you.
Yeah.
It was more them would decide it. So we tried to design sessions around, and that's been very popular. I mean, we've had about some of the, like my last year there, I remember my last session I did there at AAK, we had 85 of 120 kids at extra training on a
Yeah.
cold autumn day. And what's really good is they drive it. We're only 7 coaches with them, and they drive it. And I think there's a lot to be said for that, designing sessions that the kids drive the session. They decide when we start the drill or whatever you want to call it, the design.
Yeah.
They decide. It's their movement decides it, as opposed to a coach blowing a whistle. And we ban whistles. I ban whistles from 8 to 12. There was no whistles. Nobody was allowed to use a whistle at all.
Oh, I love that.
That was the only
I love that.
explicit thing I did.
Yeah.
No whistles. They're control mechanisms.
Final question then, really. And I wonder, in all of this, what is the role of the psychologist? A lot of psychologists find themselves kind of working in youth sport. What's the role of the psychologist here, or the psychologist working alongside the coach, or anybody else that maybe needs to be involved in kind of developing this sort of structure, this sort of culture?
Well, I think if you look at psychology, is also partly, you could say, study of behavior. Movement is a behavior. So psychology also study movement, and how we move can give insights into our emotions and intentions, I guess. So I would think that maybe part of a coach and being a psychologist is that the psychologist is partly a coach and the coach is also partly a psychologist. If you understand what I mean?
Yeah.
That I don't think we should have defined separations. I think it's very beneficial for somebody who wants to be a sports psychologist to coach. And it's very beneficial for a coach to probably do some studies in psychology or work within psychology or have a mentor who helps them. So in our course at the Norwegian School of Sports Science, our second year students now, they go out and do, so we'll say we'll have 10 football coaches and we'll have 10 sports psychology students. And we had a local school, so every week for about 4 or 5 weeks, 20 kids, we'll say, would turn up. And we'd have some coaches, we'd divide them into groups of 6 or 7, the kids, and one coach would take one group, another coach, and they would have some pre-prepared session they might have, but they would have a sports psychologist with them, a sports psychologist student with them, who would be just watching behavior and taking notes. Now, beforehand, the coach would send something to the sports psychology student. Can you pay attention to my body language with the kids? How I speak, how much I get involved in the session, do I step in too often? Things like that. And then afterwards, so that would be the Tuesday, and then the Thursday, we would just randomly select one group, and they would sit down in front of the whole class on the Thursday, and they would the sports psychologist student would interview the coach, and we have everything is filmed, so they could refer to a film because we have cameras So they can say, okay, and we'll discuss what's this, what were you doing here,
Mm.
what's your thoughts about this, what do you say about how you're standing, or all these things, your body
Yeah,
language,
yeah.
what were you saying, what exactly were you saying to the child here, and this would just be a discussion about, okay, and so how can we move on from here? Where do you think more? I guess somewhere in motivational interviewing as well,
Mm.
and so that's how they work. So the sports psychologist and the coach are working together and learning about each other.
I
I
love
think
that. And
so.
there's a real kind of intentionality there as well behind the
Yes.
coach, sort of seeking out that feedback and kind of wanting to understand a little bit more about
Yeah.
it.
So it's things like, some coach would say, like, I want to give more feedback. And a typical discussion would, well, does maybe less feedback is better? Does more feedback mean good feedback?
Mm.
And so we discuss all these nuances with the psychologist, and then I would maybe ask questions afterwards, and the whole class would ask questions about the interview. So I think the roles can be also, we can go back to coach education. Maybe this is something for coach education to work to help, not so much define the roles, help embed the role of the sports psychologist in coaching, and help embed the coaching role in some sort of psychology as well, so that they learn from each other. So I think we need to make them, they're both like different sides probably of the same coin.
Well, I was going to ask you for a takeaway, kind of a real sort of, takeaway message for people. But I think that what you've just said there kind of fits perfectly, really.
Okay,
Um,
good.
but is there anything, though, from the conversation that we've had, the things that we've been talking about, if there was something that you really wanted to leave listeners with, is there something that you would say?
I think one of the things that I've really learned in youth sport, particularly in football now, because is that there is a tendency to create internal competition where we're teaching kids in the same teams to compete with each other to keep their place in the academy or whatever the team, and yet when they go up to senior sport, they have to collaborate to compete. So they're competing with each other to win games in the same team. But really, then in senior sport, it's about collaborating with each other to win. So even there, I think there are issues. So I think a really good starting point for coaching would be, how do we make each other better? And that simple thing can be, I have the ball here, you're behind, there's a defender in front of me, you're there. How do you make me better? Oh, you move over there. Why is that? Oh, now I can get a pass. Brilliant. Now I pass to you. How can I make you better? By moving somewhere that might either distract the defender so you can run forward, or so I can get the ball back. Things like this. That's even just on football. How do we make each other better? But then how do we make each other better before training? How do we make each other better after training? How do we make each other better on game days? So I've ran sessions that are basically, I don't like themes. I think themes it just does my head in. Today's team, we're going to work with attacking, which means that there's no defenders. Basically. So, but I think you could build so much around, how do we make each other better?
Hmm.
And that's something I've really worked with a lot of kids, and it's because you're giving them ownership.
Yeah.
And by that, okay, I'm on the pitch here. I have to pay attention to the information here.
And it's such a simple concept, isn't it, as
Yeah.
well? But it can open up so much.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Mark, thank you so much. I think that's as good a place as any to sort of bring things to a close. It's been a really, really fascinating discussion. So I just want to thank you so much for taking the time to come on 80% Mental. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I hope hope this gets out there soon, and maybe we get some feedback from people.
Absolutely. So, Mark, where can people get a hold of you if they want to reach you?
I'm on Twitter, so that's actually, I have to check what I am on Twitter.
I'll sort it out. I'll put it in the
Yeah.
episode description. So if you want to get a hold of Mark, you can do that through there. So yeah, Mark, just once again, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you.
It's been wonderful. Thank you.
Well, I hope that you out there in listener land enjoyed all this as well. Again, don't forget that you can listen to all of the episodes from 3 series of 80% Mental so far. There will be more to come at 80percentmental.com. No, at 80percentmental.com. That's a very different website. You can follow us on Twitter at EPM Podcast or on Instagram at 80% Mental. I hope you've enjoyed what you've listened to today, and I will see you next time. Well, I won't see you though, will I? Because it's a podcast.